She knows what King Jesus had given up for her. So if you look at the teachings of Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount, you'll see that he teaches us to be completely different. He wants us to live in a way completely different to the one around us. An extraordinary way, a way that says Jesus is our King and we are members of the kingdom of heaven. Or we are to live as members of the kingdom of heaven. And you'll see that when you look at the Sermon on the Mount, the only way that you can do that is to do as God has promised. Which was when his Messiah, his King came, people that followed him would be changed on the inside. He promised to change us so that we wanted to obey him. And in other words, God is going to make us people who long to be like Jesus, and that means Jesus can obviously make outrageous demands on us. Demands that actually say, you need to live a life that looks like me. And there are probably a few, probably more outrageous demands from this section of Matthew 5, and that's what I want to look at now. But what I'm going to do is, I'm going to promise you that by the end of it they'll leave you breathless in shock at the depth of self-sacrifice that is required for you to live a life like Jesus. So firstly, you'll see on the Bible, the notes there, the past principle of judgment. The past principle of judgment. Have a look, verse 38, if you've got them. And it says, you've heard that it was said, eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Now it seems brutal to us, doesn't it? It comes from Exodus 21, it's also in Leviticus 24 and Deuteronomy 19. So clearly it's a key building block for God's law, and it establishes the principle of proportional retribution. In other words, the punishment fits the crime. And that's an important principle, that there's actually right and wrong should be punished fairly. But an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth also puts an end to revenge. To people trying to butcher a whole village because someone in their village had been attacked by a member of the other village. It drew a line under the incident, and once the punishment had been paid, no one could say that that wasn't fair. Revenge is ruled out. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It's dealt with, finished. People have a sense of what is right and what is wrong, and generally we all want a proportional response. Well, the principle of God's law was very clear. It was a response where it was proportional to the crime. And in Jesus' day it looked like it was applied a little bit differently. You can see that in Exodus 21 verse 27, that rather than knocking your teeth out, if someone caused you some dental damage in a fight, you paid a fine to compensate them. So there was a system of fines that you had to compensate people whom you'd hurt. And it appears that this principle of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was taken not just as a law for the nation of Israel, but people were using it to take the law into their own hands. You see, the very thing that was supposed to stop them taking personal revenge was actually being used to justify people thumping each other. So as a Jew, it might be that David came over to me and whacked me with his Bible. And I'd say, ha ha ha, an eye for an eye, and go and whack him back with mine. I wouldn't. But actually that wasn't what the law was for. The law was for governing the nation, not for us individually to take the law into our own hands. But Jesus takes this past principle and he just doesn't correct their use of it. He makes new and deeper demands on his followers. And that's where I'm going to talk about, or what I'm going to talk about next. The present principle. Secondly, the present principle of passive non-retaliation. Verse 39 says, but I tell you, do not resist an evil person. The contrast is emphatic, isn't it? But I tell you, when you're a member of my kingdom, when my spirit dwells in your heart, I expect you to live like me. Do not resist an evil person. Now those words seem nuts, don't they? Does he mean never lock your doors? welcome, come in, Mr. Thief? Does he mean we can never fight for justice? Does he mean we never want to see anyone put in prison? Well, that can't be the case, can it? Because the Lord Jesus stands himself for justice for others. The Lord Jesus himself teaches there is right and wrong. But the Lord Jesus didn't stand up for his rights. He didn't stand up for himself. He was the one willing to suffer for the sake of others. He was the one, because of his great love for the world, was willing to forego all of his personal rights. So when evil mocked him with lies, he stood silent. When evil men crowned him with thorns, he didn't demand that they really acknowledge that he was really their king. When evil men scourged his back, he didn't call down the legions of angels from heaven. And when evil men nailed him to the cross, he didn't come down from it and punish them for committing the greatest crime ever committed. The Lord Jesus suffered at the hands of evil men for you and for me. In fact, the Lord Jesus suffers at our hands, doesn't he? Because it's our sin, if we are Christians, that he takes in his body on the tree. We effectively drove the nails to crucify him. He died for us whilst we were still sinners. You see, the Lord Jesus walks the road to the cross, driven by love for people like you and for me who are evil. Be like me, says Jesus. Do not resist an evil person. And he gives us 4 pictures that illustrates what that means. Now I can't count because you'll notice on the sheet it says 3 pictures actually, but it is 4. And of this passive non-retaliation. And the first picture it gives us, I think, is to do with pride. If you look at the second half of verse 39, it says, if someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. Now, if I start squirming, by the way, it's because my back says. Now, to be struck on the cheek, it was not just pretty painful, it actually stings. And it was actually the highest insult you could pay someone in the Middle East. It wounds personal pride. And Jesus says personal pride is no reason to strike back. Offer the other cheek. Now it's easier at this stage to offer at least, a list of what this doesn't actually mean. For example, it doesn't mean you can't defend yourself if you're being attacked seriously. But if we offer that list, it actually lessens the shock of what it does mean. And it does mean that we're not to retaliate. Imagine the inner rage rising when someone in the heat of the argument just slaps you across the face. How dare you do that to me? The seething inside demands your pride that you get even. I often see it in my professional career as a police officer, with people in their cars. And I have to admit, I've even felt it myself. 2 years ago, I was in Exeter with Cara in the car, and I'm driving down this 2-lane dual carriageway on the outside lane, and it narrows into one. You've all seen, and I'm sure you've all seen. And the bloke behind me, so you can see how I started to feel, wouldn't let me pull in, wouldn't let me come back in. It was basically trying to come up the inside. I see it all the time on Penryn bypass. It really winds me up. Because if everybody did it together, we'd all take in turns, and there wouldn't be great big long player back. Anyway, he accelerated and cut me up. Sorry, I shouldn't go back into work mode. I'm off work. He forced me into the middle of the road, and so I'm down with my wife and children on the wrong side of the road, and I have to slam on the brakes and pull in behind him. At the next set of lights, Cara is clutching my arm as I'm trying to get out of the car. The second set of lights, she's still dragging me back in. He then does a very nasty hand gesture, and he turns right, and I'm just held onto the road by Cara. I was furious. How dare he do that to me?